Hello, and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I am Reese Hartle, Senior Education Strategist with SHI. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Lori Lindenberg, District Director of Enterprise Analytics and Strategy at Maricopa Community Colleges. So excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Reese.
I'm curious to know, do any of them in particular stick out in terms of impact that you've seen since implementing? What have been key takeaways that you are going to continue ensuring that you're implementing in the future because you've seen positive impact on your students and community?
I'm so glad you asked because I didn't mention one of them that has had the most impact in terms of outcomes, which we've basically eliminated all of our developmental education courses and gone completely to co-rec education. So a student is getting that extra support, but within the college level course. And our college level completion of English and math in the first year has just taken off because of that change. So we're definitely seeing the positive side of that. Of course, we need to iterate, get better, improve on how we've made this change, but we really love the results we're seeing. And then I mentioned the first year experience class, and although it's super new, I mean, it was just implemented last fall, we are already seeing such an amazing impact from that, the implementation of that class. So we were just monitoring our new to Maricopa students. So this is the first time that they've ever interacted with Maricopa, and their rate of retention from that first term last fall to this spring semester. And it's like 20 percentage points higher for the students who went through that first year experience class. And so
Wow.
really, really excited about the early results of that. We know some of that is, student selection bias into the course, but we still think even above that we're seeing some really positive outcomes from the implementation of that.
Yeah, those are still very exciting numbers, and props to you and your team for implementing those changes. One last piece there. What have you heard from that support pathway that y'all have introduced with the first year students? What have you heard from them that you think are key indicators of the difference that it's making?
Great question. We have not fully implemented all of the qualitative measurement techniques that we want to better hear from the students about this new experience. But what we have heard leading to implementing the experience was that our students need personal connection.
Mm.
We're a large district. Even post the pandemic, we still have over 130,000 students every year that are coming through our system. And our advising student ratios are tough because we are operating at a huge scale. And so when we have surveyed our students asking, we notice you haven't enrolled, what is the primary reason that you haven't enrolled? The highest barrier that they always state is, I just need to connect with someone about my next steps. I just need that extra. And so we believe that the development of that first year experience is going to give them that connection point to help develop those relationships and understand where support exists, so that they have that foundation of knowledge, so that the next time they run into a barrier or a stumbling block, they know who to go to get that help, rather than feeling like they have to get into some generic line and wait to get their questions answered.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's such a key thing for us to remember as school leaders is as we continue to integrate new and emerging technology, that we're also reminding to keep that balance of the face-to-face and human-to-human perspective for our students, so that that's not lost in it.
Definitely balanced. Yeah.
MCC district, as you mentioned, there's 10 schools, 9 of them being Hispanic serving institutions. Really curious to know, in your role, how do you try to create a culture of analytics that's mindful of potential impact bias and how it can affect the way that we interpret data?
This is the toughest question you've asked me so far.
Yeah, not an easy one. So I'm gonna sit back.
So I just want to start off by saying that I think that the fear of using data inappropriately has slowed or limited the democratization of it. And I think that's the wrong way to go. Honestly, I feel like transparency is key in helping to battle back bias. So my team has released a ton of data in the last 5 years. We've developed over 400 data visualization views in the last 5 years. So just like a ton of data. And what all of those different dashboards will show our community is that our students are complex. So I feel like bias happens when people feel like they can put a student in a box and that they know how that student will perform because of the little bit of information they have about that student. That's when I think it's dangerous. what our dashboards show you is that there is no box that you can fit our students perfectly into. They are complex, and there's a lot going on with our student body. So I think transparency has helped, but that's not obviously the whole story. Being a large institution of over 10,000 employees, we don't get to deliver the data message to each and every person. And so we don't get to make sure that there is that context provided and that sense of importance in terms of how the data is used ethically. And so what I'll say to that challenge, which I'm sure a lot of other institutions are facing, is I'm very grateful that I work in an organization that has elevated diverse leaders. And so that diverse executive leadership that we have in Maricopa, I feel like can be trusted with delivering that message of our data and how to use it ethically. And what I hear consistently from our leaders is that we are using data to drive a student-centered response, which means that the data is telling you who most urgently needs our help overcoming a burden that our systems and structures have most likely put in their way. And I think that has become the powerful message that has helped me feel like all of the data we have out there is being used to improve the student experience, not to take away from because we assume we already know what's going to happen with any particular student.
Sounds like that culture of transparency and the ability to have like honest and deep conversations with your colleagues keeps you really motivated to continue working through these really complex solutions that are in front of you and your team.
I think so. I think that that's key. I think that when you start to limit data because you're worried that it's going to be misused, then people have more of that limited story on the students.
Sure.
That's going to not to be to the benefit of being student-centered.
Right. So as a former school district leader, I know I often felt very overwhelmed by the sheer volume of data that I had to process. And I often struggled not just disseminate it in a digestible way for myself, but also to my staff. NCC now has a spectrum of presentations that you present to your executives. I'd love to hear a little bit about that and what you've learned from this approach.
So this, I think, is like the existential question for higher ed data professionals right now, is how to get the data used. And so I don't have a silver bullet. I think I've had a shared experience with all other higher ed data teams that we have limited resources and unlimited questions and a whole lot of data, which makes this very, very difficult, right? But I can tell you a little bit about our story, and it's worked. What we've done has worked out really well, and it's been a very iterative approach. So like I mentioned earlier, we've built a lot of data products. We went crazy building data products, and we were really proud of what we built until we realized that no one was using them, especially executive leadership, right? Because you're headed into that meeting and you have that question and you just need an answer. You don't have time to go to a dashboard and figure out what filters you're going to pick and then interpret what you're seeing, right? So I'm so glad that we went crazy building a bunch of things because we have become the primary users of them. So we use our dashboards and our data tools that we've built over the last 5 years to help quickly answer questions coming from our executive leadership. So although I feel like we could have gone the opposite way after realizing that these things weren't being used, we just changed the customer base, right? And we just changed how we were using those tools. So we have 2 primary initiatives that have been on our roadmap this last year to address this problem. The first one we call Insights. Insights are highly visual reports that combine data from a bunch of different dashboards that we've built to answer a burning question. So some of the ones we've done recently are how is our students' preference for course modality trended over the last 2 years? And how does that correlate to how well they do in that course modality? Especially when a student wants one modality, but ends up in a different one. Things like that.
Right.
That would take a lot of different dashboards to understand all the nuances of that. So instead we create those and then we put them all together in a package. And often we pair this with highly visualized slide deck. So it's almost like the elevator pitch to the executive leader who's heading into that meeting. You just quickly can look through the story we're trying to tell. But then on the other side, this is our second initiative. We didn't want to ignore this growing community of data ready users that is out there. And so we have also created what we call data concierge services, where we work very closely with a group of power users organized around a specific topic. So like financial aid or advising. And what we'll do is build them a completely different environment that is raw and organic, and we create curated data sets for them because they're comfortable manipulating and working with data, and they'll help us start to build things that are important and scale them and enhance them. So that has allowed us, those two strategies have allowed us to have this balance between making sure our data products are being used by our leadership and in strategic decision conversations, but also not ignoring this important trend of data democratization. And I'm really happy with the results. We've actually increased the utilization of our data products by 64% in less than a year with the balance of these two initiatives.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. And the idea of data can only be as useful as the way that we are chunking it and breaking it down strategically for our teams to be able to utilize it across the board. I'm curious to know, just through the process of both of the initiatives that you mentioned, for somebody who may be in a similar role as yourself and may be struggling with this concept, what are a few pieces of advice that you would give them to think through to solve and work on those growth areas for their community?
I've learned a tough lesson over the last couple of years. And that lesson is that data people love data. And so I love talking about data, and I like to get in the weeds, and I like to give you all the decimal points that you might be interested in instead of, rounding a nice friendly number. And that's not going to work for a lot of our customers who have a day job, and that day job is not data. And so my advice would be to, try to empathize with your end user and see the data how they would. I had the privilege of working for someone who really pushed me to communicate data more clearly. So don't put 5 years of a trend with 2 decimal points on a slide. What's that big number that person needs to walk away with after they see that view? You know the 5-year trend. You know what it's telling, what it should tell your end user. So just tell them that. Don't make them walk through all the breadcrumbs that you had to walk through to get to the story. I think that's hard for us, especially in higher education, because we value learning so much that we want to give all of our users that learning experience, but it also can be somewhat inefficient, right? So I think that there's an efficiency to making data pretty and friendly. And we really tried to do that more in the last couple of years. And sometimes we still get our trend charts in there, but we really try as much as possible to simplify.
I love that. Make it as easy as possible for your team to go out and make a difference.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lori, for joining me today. This was a really amazing conversation, and so many great pieces of the conversation that we can take away with and apply in our own work.
Well, thank you. I think you guys are asking all the right questions. So that's wonderful. I appreciate you including me in this conversation.
It's my pleasure. And please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews. Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you everyone for joining us.